Tonight is going to be interesting. I'm waiting for Usama to join us. It's always wonderful to have his company. But I'm with JC from Quranic Endgame, and we want to re examine the origins of Islam. We recently had Kalam El talking about the Ethiopic origins of Islam. I discussed this some 4 or 5 years ago, only to discover he's been doing it for about 10 years now. And he's gone into much more depth, and Muhammad may well be modeled on an Ethiopian bishop. And we also have, though, these odd pagan elements in Islam. And I want to go back to my most successful series called MOONotheism, because Islam claims to be monotheism, but we think it's moonotheism. And this theory goes back a century or more, where people see these parallels. And in fact, it goes back maybe 500 years or longer. So JC asked me to bring this back up to talk about this topic. So I'll let him introduce himself and he can explain why he thought this was relevant. And we want to see if we can find some new information, we'll lay the foundation, and maybe find a few new things that we can add to flesh out one of the major influences on Islam. So JC, well, welcome.
Hi, Lloyd. Thank you. I was looking forward to this series. I know that lots of people have been contacting me and saying, hey, you need to explore the Gnosticism again and all of these influences. And it feels like it's the right time now that we are bringing back the studies from Kalam, which is about the south of the Arabian Peninsula, then Jerusalem thesis and everything from the north. But we see in the traditions that there are a lot of stuff that they seem to have taken from other cultures. And maybe this is the third topic that we need to really bring to people's attention in order to be able to join dots and figure out more of how the narrative was created. So looking forward to seeing if this helps create a better picture of how Islam started.
Right. This is very interesting. I've got a comment here. ICX Catholic. Salam al-Masih. I watched your MOONotheism series with Sam Shamoon multiple times, and recently watched your one with Nuria Khan. Love to see it's back. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's hope we can find something of value again, find a few additional ideas in this. I mean, it's been a couple of years. We've got more information. We've got more dots that we can connect. When I spoke about this back in the day, it landed with a big splash. It was a very popular series, but some of the, shall we say, more academic YouTubers and so on weren't necessarily convinced. That, however, has changed. And we're starting to see elements that you can't readily explain, because we are now seeing, if you do a statistical analysis of the language of the Quran, there's roughly 300 words within its religious vocabulary. And all of the major religious words in Islam are foreign words. And more than half are from Syriac, Aramaic, from the Syria region. So that's the northern Levant. And then a significant percentage is from Iran. And of course, from the Hebrew. And the largest secondary percentage is from the Ethiopic. So you've got a large number of words from Ethiopic, a larger amount from Syriac. And of course, when you look at the Ethiopic, this is also blended with South Arabian terms. So you're looking at the religion that influenced it, the culture, the language that influenced it. That would be Yemeni, that would be Ethiopian, and those two are very much joined the largest empires of their day, empires that few people have heard of. But these were massively influential in Arabia, and of course, they worshipped the Babylonian moon god. JC, do you have anything to say about that, to add to that?
Well, about that, not really when we see the material we will see, but even to this day, we see when people say, oh, Christmas is pagan, and everyone is always looking at anything from the past that they could say, you see, Christians copied that from other traditions, which then you get people like Wesley Huff going, nope, that's not the case. When it comes to Islam, nobody can talk about it. Nobody can say, hey, did they actually borrow things from 500 years before Islam? Everyone is quiet about it. And it's like, well, no, let's have the conversation and see.
Say that again, sorry. I was just reading the comments and I just missed what you said there at the end.
Yeah, that we will have to actually wait and see. When it comes to Christianity, everyone is very keen on trying to find anything in history.
Pagan origins for Christianity, yeah.
Yeah, but when it comes to Islam, everyone is quiet. They don't like to say, could they copy things from this group or that group? Everyone is quiet. So it's like, let's not be quiet. Let's actually explore this.
Let's actually talk about it, because if you look at the region, we're finding that the history in the Quran, the narrative in the Quran cannot be true. Now, maybe we don't have definitive answers as to what that history was, but we can definitively say that the claims the Quran makes cannot be the truth. I mean, talking about fishermen in Mecca, talking about people who are growing green crops, farming, and beautiful dates and palm trees, massive plantations, green and rivers. No, obviously not. So yeah, let's see. This is uh, yeah. When I saw the title of the stream, it was like an oldie but a goodie. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. We want to go back through this and see if we can find anything new. So maybe let's bring it up. We're waiting for Osama to join us. I know he's traveling on the road. So this is Islam and the moon god of Babylon. Few people are aware that the South Arabians, right, that would be the Yemenis who invaded Ethiopia and controlled Arabia, and in fact were influential all the way into Iraq towards the border of Turkey and Syria. These people worship the same pantheon as the Babylonians. They worship the same gods. They may have had different names, local names, but it was the same pantheon as that of the Babylonians. So there's a few things that we can learn from this. And here you've got nobody. Moonotheism, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Now, for Muslims, of course, I mean, they worship a pedophile. Oh, you don't worship Muhammad? Oh, sorry, you revere a pedophile. You follow a pedophile. You hold him up as the highest example. Recently I've been on social media, and Paul Williams was saying, why did Jesus not ban slavery? And like, Jesus was a carpenter. He did not have an army. He did not run a government. He did not have massive wealth and power. But he did set a moral example. He didn't have sex slaves, for instance, and Jesus didn't own slaves, nor did his companions, his apostles. But Muhammad owned sex slaves. He abused sex slaves. In fact, he abused a 6-year-old girl. He raped a little girl. Then, of course, Muhammad's companions also had sex slaves and owned slaves. So the slavery is an example set by Muhammad. Jesus set a far superior example. Muhammad set quite an ugly, quite disgusting, actually, an inferior example. So therefore, this is something that Muslims are embarrassed about. So these are other elements that we should also examine as to what was the history of the region and things that Muslims don't want us to talk about. Do you have any thoughts to add, JC?
I always find it odd when somebody actually takes time to just jump in to say, "Oh, this video is silly." It's like, do whatever, create your own videos, go there, talk about the Bible, do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But here we are exploring history that your imams and sheikhs will not dare touch.
So, for instance, sex slaves are mentioned, he says in the book of Numbers. Yeah, the Bible talks about the evil that men did. It describes all of these things, but it doesn't prescribe having sex slaves. Jesus, as the example for all Christians, had no sex slaves. He didn't have sex with a child like Muhammad did. Muhammad had sex with a little girl. Muhammad owned sex slaves. Muhammad traded slaves. Muhammad's wife and Muhammad's companions, the major examples from the early Muslims, were all slavers. Jesus and his companions had no such evil actions in their background. No slavery, no sex slavery. This is something that the prophet that Muslims follow was a slaver, was a sex slaver, was a pedophile. So yeah, while these things are spoken of in the Bible, they point to evil. They are descriptive, not prescriptive, whereas Muhammad's actions normalize such evil, pedophilia, slavery, and created by a pedophile. So anyway, I around anymore. So I fish in a tie. Look, I know you enjoy telling us things that we already know, that the sky is blue, water is wet, and the hadiths are not historical. There's very little in Islam that's actually historical. It's all mythical. We all know this, right? The Quran is utterly useless when it comes to any archaeological value. The Bible is actually used as an archaeological tool. It identifies places. It helps people find places to go dig. It identifies finds. The Quran has literally no such value. Zero. The Quran is myth. So we all know this. All right. So shall we move on? Okay, yeah, so let's continue. Anything else before I go on, JC?
No, I just wanted to mention that our friends Nobody and people like this, they just don't want you to talk about this. So it doesn't surprise me if people are going to try to change the topic. They don't want you to talk about this topic.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yep. So, monotheism or monotheism? I think it's moonotheism. So now we're going to examine. I'm not necessarily going to do every single page in the slides, but we'll do this as we go. We have to look at archaeology, at history, at language, geography, and the Islamic sources. Right? Christianity was an early arrival in Arabia. For instance, the Ethiopians had a full Bible already, I think, in the 3rd century, in the 200s, and they were present in Arabia. Right? Proto-Islam can be traced to pagan religions in Yemen and Ethiopia. Islam is based, at least in part, on pagan moon god worship. All of the Arabian pagan deities are copies of Babylonian and Canaanite gods. There is no early evidence of Mecca in Arabia. There is none. There is evidence of early origins of Islam in Yemeni religion. That would be the religion of pagan moon gods. And of course, the main Arabian pagan god was called Makkah. You may have heard of a city of that name in Saudi Arabia, also by the name of Makkah. Very interesting. You have Makkah and Makkah. And I also believe we will solve, in fact, it has been solved, the mystery of Makoraba, supposedly the earliest mention of Mecca. But Makoraba is in Yemen. The location has been discovered now. So let's continue. Momotheism, yeah, I think that's a good one. All right, yeah. Any comments before I go on, JC?
No, I like monotheism. I think that's going to be for the next thumbnail.
Yeah, momotheism. I think that's yeah. Owen's got a point here as well. That is also a point. Actually, this is true. You know, what is interesting is, yeah, enslavement of women as sex slaves was not allowed in the Old Testament. That is also true, because that would fall under sexual immorality, and thou shalt not indulge in sexual immorality. So, yeah. Okay, let's continue. Now, I want to introduce Yemen. Okay, so actually, I'll just do it like this. So, we're talking of Saba, the queen of Sheba. Saba, the queen of Sheba, right? Sheba, Saba. This is the Saba kingdom site in Ethiopia. So, Yeha is a Bronze Age site near Aksum. The Aksumite kingdom was a black kingdom. The Ethiopian kingdom was the 4th largest empire in the world at the time. And this is in Ethiopia, and this is the largest archaeological site in the Horn of Africa, showing African contact with South Arabia. And Saba is the historical or Sabaean kingdom of Sheba. The Sabaeans are the Yemenis. We'll get to all of that. Yeha is precursor to the Ethiopic Aksumite Empire. They were established in the 8th century BC, and this includes temples, elite residences, and rock-cut tombs, okay? So you've got your great Bel-Gebri, right? And servant of Baal, right? The servants of Baal. And the Sabaeans were a Semitic people from an Arabian kingdom in western Yemen, right? Their empire flourished from the 8th century BC to 275 AD, and the temple is known as Al-Makkah Temple, the Temple of Makkah, right? Of course, that's where Muslims go to worship these days. Now, the Yemeni Q sounds like Qa, but in Arabic it becomes Ka. So Makkah becomes Makkah, right? So there's a slight difference between the two, the South Arabian and the language. So here you've got Al-Makkah Temple in Yemen. Here you've got the Makkah Kaaba. This is Arabia from 1843. This is a 1843 map. You've got Najran here on just across the border of Yemen into Arabia. And here you've got Aksum and Yeha Temple. So this is an Al-Makkah Temple. Here's another Al-Makkah Temple, and there were multiple of these Kaabas. No, the Sabaeans are not quite from Ethiopia. The Sabaeans were in Ethiopia. So, no, I think we can put forward my views because Muslims have their own platforms to put forward their views. And besides, we know Islam pretty well at this point. We don't need to, beg Muslims to assist us in reading the Quran. It's actually very readable by anyone with half a brain. So, right, now let's continue. Let's have a look at the Sabaeans from a Muslim perspective. This is written by Muhammad Shukri al-Alusi. He lived from 10th December 1802 to 29th July 1854, and he compared the Sabaean Muslim religious practices to Islam in his book, The Bulugh al-Arab fi Ahwal al-Arab. And he said Arabs during the pre-Islamic period used to practice things that were included in the Islamic Sharia. For example, they did not marry both a mother and her daughter. They considered marrying two sisters simultaneously to be the most heinous crime, and they censured anyone who married his stepmother. And he says, and these pagans, these Sabaean pagans, these Babylonian moon god worshippers, made the major Hajj and the minor Umrah pilgrimage to the Kaaba. They performed the circumambulation around the Kaaba. They ran 7 times between Mounts Safa and Marwa. They threw rocks at a rock like Muslims do, and they washed themselves after sexual intercourse. All of these things are exactly what Muslims do. And these were practices that these moon worshippers did, which Muslims copied. They also gargled, they sniffed water up into their noses, they clipped their fingernails, removed pubic hair, and performed ritual circumcision. Likewise, they cut off the right hand of a thief, and they stoned adulterers. Very interesting. Your thoughts, JC?
Very, very interesting. Now, in these medieval sources that I'm actually reading at the moment, I cannot guarantee this, I'm still going through them, but they seem to say that Jews and Christians were not allowed into Mecca, but that there were lots of pagans, and they were going pagans from all over the world to buy stuff from the city. So I found it interesting. You would have thought that only Muslims were allowed into the city in the medieval period, but it looks like pagans were perfectly welcome. Odd.
Sorry, go on again. Say that again.
That they seem during the medieval period, Jews and Christians were not allowed into Mecca, but these early sources, medieval sources, they seem to indicate that pagans were allowed into Mecca and they were doing a lot of trading and stuff. Which,
Yeah, and
you know, is a
that
little
was
bit
the early
weird.
practice of the pagans prior as well, that they would have everyone would put their god inside the Kaaba. Everyone would have their god in the Kaaba. Everyone was welcome. All gods welcome as long as you traded with them in peace. So yeah, but these are exactly the same things. So let's have a look. In Bulugh al-Arab, okay, fi Ahwal al-Arab, we read the 4 sacred months, Rajab, Dhu al-Qada, Dhu al-Hijjah, and Muharram, had been considered sacred during the pre-Islamic period known as the Jahiliyyah. Right, that's the condition of ignorance. Raids, taking revenge, war fighting, and disputes were forbidden during these months, exactly like it is during Ramadan. If a man were to meet his enemy who killed his father or brother during these months, he would not quarrel with him. During the sacred months, people were under restriction not to fight or make raids and had to remove their spearheads as a sign they would avoid fighting at all costs. So Islam borrowed these months, these holy months, from pre-Islamic Arabs and introduced nothing new into the world. And that's Abdallah Abdal Fadi is the Quran Infallible, page 127. Here's a picture of the book. Here, did the Sabaeans fast as well? I believe they did. I believe the Sabaeans fasted as well. So, yeah. Any thoughts, JC, before we continue?
So, well, when we did that show last week, showing that the Quran is all very Judeo-Christian and so on, and then what we see is that the traditions, they are not Judeo-Christian. They seem to have the Quran, which is Judeo-Christian, but then the traditions and the religion is actually formed by borrowing from everyone else that was nearby, and these guys were a stone throw away. So it makes sense.
Right. Let's continue then. Okay, so al-Makkah, it's a proper noun. Okay, in the Semitic or Sabaean, it's al-Maq. We'll see it here, L-M-Q-H. In the Ethiopic and Ge'ez, you can see these languages are very similar. Like this B symbol, it just is backwards, and here it's just upside down here. You can see these are very similar. The P symbol, the lollipop, the little circle in the lollipop, just a little lower down, and so on. But you can see it's greatly similar languages here, right? Ethiopic or Ge'ez. So Al-Makkah is a moon god once worshipped in Yemen, in Saba or Sheba, and in Ethiopia. That's because the Yemenis had invaded and colonized that region. So the synonyms are Al-Makkah or Muk, right? The Sabaean capital was Marib, 120 kilometers east of Sana'a. They were a seafaring people. They built great irrigation works, they built castles, and they built temples. The British Museum, in one reference I found, called them the oldest and most important of the South Arabian kingdoms. And of course, in Arabic, in Sabaean, you see here the Sabaeans, and then of course they're called the Asabiyun, right? The Sabaiyun. And of course, in Islam, in the Quran, the Sabaiyun, Muhammad regards them as people of the book, oddly enough, as Christians, when clearly they are not. Very, very odd. Yeah, interrupt me at any time, JC, if you want to. All right. So this is
Yes.
Marib here. This is Sanna, right? This is this western part of Yemen here, and here is Eritrea and Ethiopia, Djibouti. So these people, and of course, this region around here is where Makoraba is. Okay, that's where we'll see that. Okay, there are many other Al-Makka temples, right? Dedicated to Al-Makka, the moon god of Saba. So it's a 14 by 18 meter by 14 meter temple, right? Roughly square. And being Sabaean, it is similar to temples of the Saba kingdom capitals like the Al-Makka temple at Sirwa and the Al-Makka Awam temple in Marib. There were multiple of these temples to Al-Makka or Kabas. After Marib, Sirwa was the most important economic and political center of the kingdom of Saba at the start of the 1st century BC on the Arabian Peninsula. In front of the building, what was interesting was a platform with 6 pillars called a propylon, right? Grat Bel Gebri, the palace, also once had 6 pillars. And we'll look at that. The whole idea of pillars, like the 5 pillars of Islam, these are very interesting. So Yeha has been identified as a pre-Aksumite. It's based on 19 inscriptions, actual archaeology. How many ancient inscriptions are there in Mecca? Do you know, JC?
How many inscriptions? In Mecca, I think it's about 0.
Yeah, roughly 0, exactly. It has no archaeological value, right? Isn't that weird? For the oldest and most important city in the world, supposedly, it has literally 0 archaeology to support it.
Yeah, indeed. And for anyone who is thinking, hang on a minute, but Mecca then is not written in exactly the same manner. It is a common thing in all over the world where you would have things that sound quite similar and then they kind of converge. It's like if you have La, the moon god, and in Arabic, then the La is Allah. And then you also have Ilah or Ilaha. All of those things sound very similar and then they converge into one. So it is quite common. It wouldn't be really far-fetched to think that Mecca could have actually meant many, many things. And one of them is this in the south, then is something else in other regions. In the end, it becomes one big thing because it's a sound that people will be familiar with. So these things are, happen all the time. And something is a little bit far from these dates. I think it was in the 3rd century BC that the people from that region, from the south of the Arabian Peninsula, they minted coins, and because they were pagans, they actually copied the Greek coins in order to just have their own. So they do have a history of copying things from other traditions in that region.
No, they wouldn't. Islam wouldn't copy things. Definitely
No.
not. Yeah, I'm just trying to log into something to get. Of course, okay, so let's continue. Now, there are 8 pillars at the Awam al-Makka temple in Marib, right? Here's an example of these pillars, these propylons, right? Something to keep in mind. But notice also, if you go to Yemen, you're going to find, even despite war and weathering and so on and neglect, you're going to find significant old preserved temples and sites, right, that go back to 1000 BC, for instance, right? How many of these do we find in Mecca, or do we find in and around the area of Mecca, JC? Do we know of any old archaeological sites like this that are 3,000
Well,
years old?
archaeological sites, I think the oldest thing ever found is from like the medieval times. So absolutely not. And I can't remember reading in any accounts anyone mentioning anything like ancient. Like they went there and it was like a huge coliseum or anything that then got destroyed. No, it seems to just pop out of nowhere.
There, sorry, you broke up there. Your audio.
Yeah, that they just don't, that there is no archaeological sites. We're still waiting for anything pre-Islamic from Mecca. And
Yeah,
I have looked actually at videos where people have gone to the museums in Mecca, and you can actually see everything that they show. There is nothing ancient. There are two pillars and then one piece of wood, and they say, "Oh yeah, this is from the time of Muhammad," and it's like you
yeah,
cannot prove it. Everything is like this. There is nothing ancient.
yeah. I mean, look at how well preserved this site is, right? Despite the neglect and the war, right? They've got many sites like this, and they've got inscriptions, they've got graffiti, they've got different languages inscribed. They've got carvings, they've got different gods, they've got so much detail on these. If you read through the archaeology, and Allah's hair comb, someone said that's possibly the case. Scrunchy said, Allah's hair comb. Time to comb the desert. Yeah, they combed it. Look at all this detail. There's nothing like this in Mecca. Very interesting, right? Here you've got Najran. This is Marib and Sirwa on this older map, and you've got Aksum and Yeha. So you can see these guys just nipped across here, took over this region. Eventually, these guys became dominant, nipped across, and then took over the region instead, right? So this is our one temple. So this is from the Smithsonian. Okay, they said they found a Nokia brick phone during archaeological Meccan digs. Yeah, of course they did. We know that. And so Wendell Phillips and his team excavated the great walled enclosure of Mahram Bilqis. That's the ancient temple of Wam, dedicated to the moon god Al-Makka. And tribal unrest halted their efforts in 1952. But decades later, the government of Yemen invited his daughter, I believe it was, and a similar group to continue her brother's work. 8 September 2014. Okay, I found this report. So now that's from the Smithsonian. Now let's have a look at these columns, right? These columns are important. We've got to think about these columns, right? The pillars of Islam. Why these pillars? Why this emphasis of these pillars? They may not physically have pillars, or maybe they do, but the pillars go back historically, right? Because they settled in this region and they had to integrate and adapt and adopt the existing religious ideas and architecture and such from the region. So we have to look at the Rajajil columns, otherwise known as stelae. So archaeologists working in Saudi Arabia puzzle over the meaning of more than 50 groups of oddly arranged standing stones, the most famous of which are at the site of Rajajil near the ancient oasis town of Al-Juf, right? And these are thought to date to the Chalcolithic period, which is 4,500 to 3,500 BC. In other words, you're looking at 6,500 years ago. And these were raised, right, more than 5,500 years ago by unknown people. Many pillars are now fallen, others are tilting heavily. They were erected in Saudi Arabia's Al Juf province during the 4th millennium. So let's have a look here, right? These are pillars. So you went from ancient pillars to the modern ones from the temples of Makkah. Any thoughts, JC, before I go on?
Just the symbolism that it's seeing how the Quran is Judeo-Christian, but then we get to their traditions. They're talking about the pillars of Islam, these sort of things that have nothing to do with Judeo-Christian. If the origins of Islam had been Judeo-Christian, that's all that we would see. Only references to things that we were familiar with. But it seems like everything that became Islam, it came from other things that are really not Judeo-Christian. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, so if it's not, yeah, this is going to be a lot of that going on as we go. Now, Al Juf was a significant stopover point on several ancient trade routes. I thought Mecca was on the trade routes. I thought Mecca was a major city, but there is literally no evidence to support that. But we do have cities that were on trade routes. It connected the Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, Mesopotamia, all the way up into Iraq and Syria, and of course, probably Turkey. Now, one trade route, one of the oldest land routes in recorded history, ran from Yemen parallel to the Red Sea coast through Medina, right? What is today Medina. I'm not saying Medina existed back then. A place called Alula and also Madain Salih. And it turned northeast to Al Juf and then north towards Damascus and Turkey. The road avoided what's known as the Great Nafud Desert to the south and the less passable terrain of Wadi al-Sirhan to the north. Now, the stones may have indicated the presence of the crossroad or the safer route to take. Of course, they also have a religious significance. We'll look into that. But the standing stones of Al Rajajil represents an enigma that very few people have heard of, right? Yeah, Dresden Museum says, amazing to me how they built these things in the middle of nowhere. Right, exactly. There's more of them. So there's loads of these everywhere. Okay, there's tons of these. But now, think about Jerusalem for a moment. Think of the archaeology in and around Jerusalem. You'll find ancient Jewish coins. You'll find inscriptions. You'll find things that are clearly mentioned in the Bible, right? You go to Mecca, you don't find much except sand, right? Lots of sand and nothing much else. Jerusalem is saturated with Jewish history. But if you go into Arabia, you don't find Judeo-Christian history, like you said, which is odd. You'd think you'd find Judeo-Christian history in Mecca, right? But you don't. What you do find is this old pagan symbolism, which has nothing to do with Judeo-Christian history. Your thoughts, JC?
Yeah, there must have been a lot of things linked to the Judeo-Christian traditions, certainly, but most of it destroyed. We know that Islam is very, very good at destroying evidence. They're doing that to this day. So it's only now when we're starting to find churches and Christian symbols in that region. But in the past, anything that was Judeo-Christian would have been destroyed because they would see that as heretic. But it's surprising how we can still see some things from a very long gone era.
Yeah. So let's have a look at more of these. I'm just going to bring this up quickly. Give me 1 second. I'm going to bring this up just to show you here. These are the kinds of things you'll find. This looks very similar to what we find in Petra. I'm going to bring this up here. This is like the kind of thing we would find in Petra. This is what's in Saudi Arabia, right? You'll have another view of this one. I'll just open this in a new tab. You can see this here, right? This is something very different. People living in rock-cut houses. This would be similar to the people of Petra, and I've been to Petra a couple of times, by the way. Sorry, no, I've spent a couple of days in Petra. My bad. Here, very interesting. This is very similar to Petra. So we're looking at the same people, right? The same pagans who founded Petra possibly were involved with this. What do you think, JC? It's the very similar architecture.
Yes, I think that is Madain Saleh. This is in Petra. I think they actually discovered lots of artifacts, of course, and also manuscripts and all sorts of things, which then, if it was the same with Islam, we should be able to find like copies of the original Quran and things like this in all of these places. And I reckon that at one point, the proto-Qurans or sections of it would have been found in lots of those places. All of that has now gone, hence why the Quran seems to appear out of nowhere when we know that that's not the case. But certainly, I think there has been a lot of destruction of evidence over the centuries.
Right. This is the treasury in Petra. You can see here the kind of symbolism, and then you can look at this kind of symbolism as well. There's certainly similarities. I mean, I spent a couple of days walking around Petra, and it's huge. I didn't get to see even all of it. And it was like 40 plus degrees, so it gets really hot. Okay, so just so you know, you find lots of this kind of thing in Mecca, sorry, in Saudi Arabia, in Alula, right? And you can see more of this kind of thing here, but let me close this for a second. So have a look here. These are called mustatils, right? I'm just going to bring this up over here. So these mustatils are in this region, north. This is towards Petra, right? As we can see here, it's north towards Petra in the red highlighted region. And I'm going to show you a few of these, right? You see this stuff all over Saudi Arabia, right? There's thousands of them. You can see here, there's thousands. This is Khaybar, or Khubr, as my friend used to call it. Okay, this is Medina here. This is Medina. This is Khubr. This is Alula. And these green dots are sites. Tema. Keep those places in mind. These sites are everywhere. So what saturates Mecca is pagan rock art, not Judeo-Christian art. Any thoughts, JC?
Well, rather absence, because you are showing that all of the areas around Mecca, they have a lot of stuff. But when we get to Mecca, there is nothing.
There's
It's like
nothing.
it should be the same,
No,
right?
it is crazy. There's nothing. Nothing. Look at all of this. Ha'ir, okay, Khaybar, right? Or Khubr, as my friend from Jordan used to call it, Khubr. I've been to Khubr a couple of times. Tamar, right? So odd, but you get to Mecca and like, where's that, right? You'd think you'd find a little bit more, but yeah, it's kind of missing, right? So yeah, these are called mustatils, and they've got lots and lots of these things. This is the kind of thing that you're looking at here. So there's loads and loads of these ancient constructions going back 5, 6, 7,000 years, right? But you don't find anything Judeo-Christian. You find pagan stuff. Okay, enough of that. Let's continue. You can see these sites are old, and these sites are everywhere. They're prolific. There's thousands of these in Arabia, in that part of the world. Thousands. Okay, what are propylae, right? And yeah, it does make us think of the Nabateans, right? Hello, Catherine. So propylae, these are monumental gates or entranceways to a temple or religious complex, right? It's a symbolic, secular, religious partition. So propylae are columns, right? Think of Roman columns or pillars, and the pillars separate the sacred from the profane, right? From the secular from the religious, the haram from the halal, except it's odd that the haram is something that is sacred in Islam in that sense, right? Now, if you go into Century Dictionary Encyclopedia, in ancient Egyptian architecture, oddly enough, it's taken from Egypt. It's a monumental gateway, usually between two towers in outline like truncated pyramids. Okay, hold on. I want you to think of the following, right? So I want you to think of two towers, the two towers. Can you see two towers in this picture, JC?
I can see two towers, yes.
Yeah, I see two towers. Yeah, and they also, the Muslims, if you go through newspaper reports, you'll see, oh, the moon is rising directly above the Kaaba, and it's directly between the two towers of the mosque. They seem to have an affinity for the moon, as we will find as we go through this over the next while. But it comes from Egypt, not from Jerusalem, not from the Jews. No, it comes from Egypt, of all places. So between two towers, and in Chambers' 20th century dictionary, a monumental gateway before the entrance of an ancient Egyptian temple. The symbolism is Egyptian, right? And notice here, you see these pillars that separate the profane from the sacred. Can you see the pillars here? This symbolic architecture, a monumental gateway, not a literal gateway, but you see something on this place in Jerusalem, this dome of something.
Very interesting. So it does look like they were copying from absolutely everyone. So the Quran from Jews and Christians, and then when they get to everything else, architecture, and they're just taking from the whole vicinity. It's like they had no history or they wanted to hide their history, and then they just copied from everyone around them. Very, very cool.
Yeah. So you'd think they'd be copying things from, I don't know, Jerusalem, but they don't. They somehow are copying pagan ideas. So from your perspective, JC, are we seeing pagan influence in Islam along with every other influence, but are we seeing a distinct pagan element as well?
Well, the more you show, the more evident it actually seems, because if it was from the Jews and Christians, they would have just taken, we would recognize all of that. But we don't recognize them, and then you're showing that those traditions, very similar, they appeared in the South, all of these pagan influences. So yeah, it looks like the traditions appear in a place where these things were going on, and they came from pagans in the past, basically.
Yeah. And notice you've got these symbolic entrances here. You've got a pillar, pillar, pillar. You see, there's also the symbolic pillars as well. You can see these symbolic pillars with the inset that also separates. So there's that symbolism as well, the archway. It's an archway between one space and the other space, right? Now, I also want to mention that in Islam, this is Hermes Trismegistus. He is the father of Hermeticism. He brought wisdom, but he's also known by multiple names. He's a god, the Egyptian god Thoth. He's also a Greek god and a Roman god. But of course, he is also the Islamic prophet Idris, of all things. So somehow they've incorporated Egyptian, Roman, pagan gods into their religion as well, just out of interest's sake. right. Oh, so masons use two towers as well. Okay, that's interesting. Masonry uses. So let's go to Aksum. Now, Aksum was one of the four great powers alongside Rome, Persia, and China. They were the fourth biggest empire of the day, according to Mani, the founder of Manichaeism. They had influence over Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Arabia, and Egypt. They had extensive trade contract with Asia and the Mediterranean. They were trading with the Romans, and the Aksumites developed Africa's only indigenous written script, Ge'ez. Right, and you can see this massive stele they made here. Right. Now, the Sabaeans in Africa, so around the middle of the first millennium BC, there were Sabaeans in the Horn of Africa, in the area that later became the realm of Aksum, right? But we have inscriptions, and of course, they followed the national cult of Al-Makkah. Interesting, Makkah, the only city in that region called Makkah is what we anglicize as Mecca. But of course, the ancients called it Makkah, like Muslims often call it today. And they were mixed up with various non-Sabaean communities, right? So that's very interesting. Some remarks on the origin of the Aksumite stele. And they want to investigate the origins of these Aksumite stele, these big pillars, because these Aksumites also had pillars in the Near Eastern and African megalithism. So you have stele from the 3rd millennium BC in the Negev as well. So you found these in the Negev desert, right? They were associated to cairns of flat stones. We saw those in Arabia, in Alula, right? Also in Jordan, right? And a sanctuary devoted to the ancestor cult dating between the 4th and 1st millennia BC was found at Riske in southern Jordan. Okay, excellent. The circle, 20 meters in diameter, stone slabs, carved with male and female portraits. Interesting. Just a couple of things to note. There's a lot of this sort of pagan symbolism going around, not just in Ethiopia, but all over Arabia. Any comments before I go on?
Something that is not incredibly relevant, but I'll say it anyway. I think there is a manuscript that has been found from around the 4th or 5th century in Aksum, in that region, a village that was all a Jewish village. And they wrote things because they wanted to rebuild their own temple and stuff. And they don't mention anything to do with Makkah. I think the that were going on in Arabia, but Makkah somehow it been mentioned in there, but it looks like they were not aware of that. So even when we find any other evidence during that time in any region at all, we expect someone is going to mention Makkah. It's such an important city, but it really is absent from every single record so far.
Yeah, interesting. But oddly enough, the only archaeology we do find is pagan archaeology. Isn't that odd? Isn't that odd? We find pagan archaeology. We're not finding crosses, really. I mean, we're not finding anything related to Abraham. We're finding stuff related to ancient paganism. So the Aksumite Empire was a wealthy trading empire in Northeast Africa. They achieved prominence by the 1st century, unifying and controlling a large territorial state and access to trade routes linking the Roman Empire to the Middle East and India, even apparently as far as China. It introduced Christianity to the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa. So the Ethiopian Empire was extremely powerful, and they introduced Christianity to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Archaeologists have found evidence of a complex society called Diamat or Dimit. That name will be relevant much, much later, right? That preceded the rise of Aksum by several centuries, based in Yeha. We started with Yeha in Ethiopia, okay? So we just mentioned the Yeha. So you've got this society, this Dimit society or culture. It was strategically positioned at the crossroads of trade routes. Again, was Mecca on any trade routes? Well, in theory, yes. In practice, we have no evidence whatsoever, except for these stories that Muslims tell that cannot be proven. So trading partners included most of the major states in the known world: Egypt, South Arabia, the Middle East, India, and China. Tell me, JC, do we have anyone in India, Egypt, South Arabia, the Middle East, India, China, the Roman Empire that speaks of trade with Mecca?
Not one. Never.
But you've got people talking of trade with a culture from 3,000 years ago in Arabia. Why nothing from Mecca?
Because they were very discreet.
They were selling drugs and they were trying to keep it on the down low, you mean? Even though it,
No idea. It's a mystery.
yeah, it's certainly a mystery to me. It's interesting. You've got an ancient culture going back 2,000 years and more, where there's distinct evidence for them trading with the known world. And then Mecca, which is supposed to be the world's oldest city on a major trade route, and you have literally zero evidence that these people were known or traded with. Very, very odd, very strange. Their most important commercial partner were the Byzantine Romans. So the Byzantine Romans were trading with these guys, but they've never heard of the Muslims in Mecca. Odd. So the Aksumite Empire was influential here, right? And they even controlled areas up to Mecca. Now, this is conservative because these guys, it looks like their influence extended well north towards Petra. They were just Asians being inscrutable. Okay, thank you, Catherine. I trust you on that. Yeah. So there you go. So these guys had huge influence over this region, all the way into what we know as Mecca today, right? So they traded up and down the coast, and they traded all the way to India, right? They traded deeper into Africa and all the way up into Egypt, and then up into Europe with the Greeks, right? So they traded all the way north across the Mediterranean. These guys were some serious traders. They did actual trading. But the Meccans, no one's heard of the Meccans. Isn't that weird? Coins. Aksum was the first African country to mint its own coins in gold, silver, and bronze in the standard weight categories issued by the Roman Empire, which they learned. These coins have been recovered in multiple foreign locations, even as far away as India. Their coins have been discovered around the world in the known. Have we found any Meccan coins anywhere, like in Greece or Spain or Italy or anywhere else like India? Any Meccan coins that were found?
Not only no coins, nothing. There is nothing, not even a single vase that actually came from Mecca. It's not even mentioned until the 8th century. So I know that Muslims, like Usama always says, they will look at this and say, well, that's because of a miracle. That's because Allah willed it and things like this. And it's like, no, look, these people were trading all over the place. The place is not mentioned. It first is mentioned in the Quran, and then it appears in the world. Okay, it is a fabricated city, and if there was something in there before, they changed the name, and maybe it appears in maps. It was not Mecca. So it's just about the history, but it's quite simple. All of these people would have mentioned Mecca, even if it was there but tiny, but they didn't. So that's it. About coins, you wouldn't really expect to find coins necessarily from Mecca, but you would expect to find coins in Mecca from other places because it was a trade hub. But also, we didn't find any of them. So, quite clear.
Maybe people were just stealing the coins. I mean, maybe it was just a case of simple theft, You never know.
Yeah, maybe
You
it
know,
was the tidiest city in history where everything was just removed. The thing is, my hometown, which is a tiny city, nobody knows where it is. It's tiny.
isn't it
And
Guadalajara in Mexico
all
or Chihuahua in
it's like in the
Mexico?
middle of nowhere. Yeah, and there is like one Roman like bastion there was there, like something small. There is a ridiculous amount of stuff found. We have full museum. We have sent things even abroad, just because of one little place. And a place like Mecca, it would have been built on the ruins of the previous Mecca. Cities are built on top of cities, basically. Mecca is the only city that doesn't happen. By miracle, is the tidiest city where you don't get to find anything. It's just quite clear. And as much as Muslims will say, oh no, well, there is an explanation. No, there is no explanation. You should have mummies from that city.
Yeah. You know what I find amazing is that Muslims always want to show that Palestine really existed, and the earliest coin they can show you is from 1927, and it's got Hebrew writing on it and English. Isn't that fascinating? 1927, right? It's got Hebrew writing on it as well as Arabic, but also English. So I guess the English were there first. Very, very odd, you know? So yeah, I can't remember exactly what's on the coin. We'll get to that later, but that's really see. Do you know that the oldest Palestine coin is 1927? But we can find Roman coins and Hebrew coins from the first, second, and third centuries and earlier. So these Aksumites, they were the first Christian kingdom to put crosses on coins. Let's have a look. So here you see crosses on the coins. Here's another cross. Here's a staff with a cross on top. Here's another cross here. Here's another big cross here, very obvious cross. Here's another cross. Here's another big cross on the coin. So they put crosses on their coins to mark that they were a Christian empire. Do we have any Meccan coins with the sun and star or something like that?
I think the first truly Islamic coin was by Abdul Malik when he actually removes images, because if you follow the narrative, then images were haram. And yes, there are all of these stories of people were not able, Abdul Malik was not able to remove the coins or the images because people would get upset or what. Doesn't matter. The first actual coin that appears that is fully in Arabic with no images, compliant with Islam, is 696, I think it is, Abdul Malik. So before then, yeah, it was a bit weird.
Okay, right. So now the Aksumite ruler was called the Negusa Nagast, the king of kings. Now, King Ezana ruled from about 320 to 360 AD, and he converted to Christianity, as we verify within the coins, right? And Ezana had coins with a pagan. Does this symbol look familiar? Have you seen a religion that uses this symbol? A crescent and a star?
Well, yes, because you've shown me before, but for the audience, I don't know if they've seen it before.
Yeah. So originally they had a crescent and a star, and they switched their coins to crosses, right? So they had a disc and a crescent, right? These later coins have crosses on them. So they go from these coins, and we still actually have lots of these coins, right? And so they were the first Christian king to put crosses on currency. And they switched from these coins with the crescent and star to crosses, to actual crosses on coins. So Ethiopia becomes the first Christian state. Now, I know there's always going to be debate. Well, was it Malta? Was it, some Sicily? Was it Armenia and so on? But Aksum becomes the first sub-Saharan African state to embrace Christianity. So they embraced Christianity as state religion in the early 4th century. For a century prior, Roman traders had brought knowledge of the Christian religion to the Aksumite Empire through their the trade network. Okay, then in the 6th century, the Aksumite king Caleb sent a force across the Red Sea to subdue the Yemenites, and he dominated South Arabia for 70 years. And the Byzantine Empire supported Aksum largely due to Yemen's persecution of Christians. So let's have a look at the very first church in sub-Saharan Africa from the Smithsonian Magazine, right? Church unearthed in Ethiopia rewrites the history of Christianity in Africa. Archaeologists can now more closely date when the religion spread to the Aksumite Empire. I'm just going to click on this and bring up this article, right? So I'm going to show you this. So what we have is a church unearthed in Ethiopia rewrites the history of Christianity in Africa. That's the dig site, right? Ethiopia, the oldest Christian basilica in sub-Saharan Africa, right? This is going to be near Aksum, okay? Near Aksum, but I want you to see they've got crosses. You can see a cross here. They've got crosses here, but also they've got the Templar cross that you've got here. I think the St. James cross they call it. No, different cross. So you've got, this is a stone pendant with a cross and the term venerable in Ethiopia's ancient Ge'ez script found outside the Eastern Basilica wall. Well, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. But then, of course, we have this interesting bull symbol. And this bull symbol is going to be important because this historically is related to the ancient religion, which was of the worship of the moon god Al-Makka, and these horns. No fish symbols. Exactly. Yes, Scrunchy. No fish symbols. So very interesting. Yeah. Any thoughts, JC, before I go on?
Yes, about the image that you actually put there about the archaeological site, and they're saying, "Oh, we found this thing, and this rewrites the history of what happened." It's like, well, in that region, every time something is found, then you get to look at the history and understand it better, and very often it changes everything that we knew. That is not happening in Mecca. It's quite the opposite. You should have these archaeological sites right there to really find out the most amazing artifacts, if not from the time of Abraham, as they claim, at the very least from the time of Muhammad. But it is like forbidden to actually find anything. They don't have any archaeological sites, which should be a huge red flag for anyone with half a brain.
Right. They even found incense burners, right? They even found those. And they came across an inscription asking for Christ to be favorable to us. Okay, now notice in the research paper, the scientist in charge there says, this unusual collection of artifacts suggests a mixing of pagan and early Christian traditions, because you had Christianity setting up shop amongst a pagan people. So these relics would still exist, would still be around, all right? But also potentially there could be a mixing of the two, a syncretism, a syncretic mixture between these different, otherwise incompatible religions to try to make them compatible, right? So bear that in mind. But you actually have archaeological evidence. In Mecca, we've got now zero, of course, nothing. And notice that these people, these Christians, which became a Christian nation, at one point invaded and controlled South Arabia. They controlled Arabia at one point. So they took Christianity and their Bible with them. So while you may not find an Arabian Bible, there was an Ethiopian Bible very early on from the 3rd century or 4th century in Arabia. So the first hijrah, the first migration went to Ethiopia, to Abyssinia, right? According to the Islamic records, which we're supposed to believe. Muslims found refuge in Christian Aksum, that's Ethiopian Eritrea, at about 614 AD. When the apostle saw the affliction of his companions, and that though he escaped it because of his standing with Allah and his uncle Abu Talib, he could not protect them. He said to them, if you were able to go to Abyssinia, it would be better, for the king will not tolerate injustice. It is a friendly country. Thereupon his companions went to Abyssinia. This was the first hijrah in Islam. That's in Ibn Ishaq. It's also in various of the other Muslim sources. Any comment before I go on?
On that source, it says that when they got there and they spoke with the king, they explained what they believed about Jesus, and that the king said, "Oh, that's actually very close to what we believe about Jesus," which of course it makes no sense. He would have said, "You guys are heretics," because the people in Abyssinia, they were actually Christians. So we know that there is a problem there between what we know of history, that guy would have been Christian, and the first pilgrimage, in theory, that actually went there, and they were describing Jesus like a Christian would, not in the Islamic way. So that's quite curious.
Yeah. Do you know that Islam is truly the first scientific religion? For instance, Muslims on their flying carpet, when they created them, they decided, on the Burak, they decided to go into space, and they discovered that the Earth was round and that it rotates, right? And what happened was the Muslim scientists, these Muslims, they watched the Earth spin for a whole 24 hours, and then they got bored and they said, "Guys, let's just call it a day."
True story.
True story. Yeah, for those who weren't paying attention, that was a joke. So Catherine says the backstory of Islam is rapidly falling apart. Yeah, so they watched the Earth spinning for 24 hours and they said, "Guys, let's just call it a day." And Catherine thought it was funny. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate it. You have a sense of humor. Yeah. Okay. So in Arabic, okay, al-hijra ila al-habasha, right? Habisha, where Muhammad's followers, the Sahaba, fled the persecution of the ruling Quraysh tribe. JC is back.
Yeah,
Welcome
actually, I
back,
thought you
JC.
were gone. Okay. Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. Yeah, no, you just disappeared there for a second. So The Axumite king. So yeah, Janice says she missed the joke. Oh yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it was kind of an arbitrary one. So the Axumite king who received them is known in Islamic sources as the Negus. Now remember, he was the Negusa Nagast, the king of kings, and in Arabic, the Najasi, right? Ashama ibn Abjar. Where they got the name, heck, I don't know. Some of the exiles returned to Mecca and they made the 622 Hijrah to Medina with Muhammad. Others remained in Abyssinia for 14 years before they came back. Okay. So I'm not going to go into this, but the Christian king asked them if they had with them anything which had come from God. Jafar confirmed the king commanded him to read it. Jafar then recited a passage from the Quran, Surah Maryam. What year was this? This would have been, what year did they go? 614, right? So Muhammad was 44 years old, correct?
Wait, the first hijrah would have been 621, but the one from Muhammad.
It says
So just a few
614. So it
years
says
before, yeah.
roughly 614
Yeah.
AD they went, okay? So now notice they're with the king and they're reading from the Quran. Was the Quran written at that point? Because the Quran was only assembled 2 years after Muhammad's death or something, because it was collected on shoulder blades of camels, on leaves, on rocks, potatoes, banana peels. How
Okay,
could they
very
be
good
reading
point.
him a passage from the Surah Maryam when the Quran wasn't finished yet?
Okay, yeah, very good point. That is impossible. Obviously, Muslims will say, but the Sahaba, they had their own codices, they were writing things down. It's like, they have to try to explain these things away. But no, it actually sounds like they already have a book. They have their own version of the Bible. Say they go there and they read that.
But
Yeah, that's
who
the
wrote it?
problem.
Where did they get it? It wasn't finished yet. It wasn't fully collected yet. How do we know? The story makes no sense. When the
Actually,
king heard
another
it,
thing we could actually, do you have, by any chance, the order of the surahs when they were revealed? We can see if Surah Miriam was revealed much later, and then we know we have a bigger contradiction, or if it was one of the first ones to be revealed. I thought
yeah.
you had a
I
list
wonder,
at one
could
point.
someone in the audience please look up when was Surah Maryam revealed? Was it revealed between by the year 614, right? When this would be before the first Hijrah, because they took the book with them. If someone can please check that date, right? Can we please check the date when Surah Maryam is supposedly completed and written and part of the Quran? I mean, the Quran was only assembled and edited after Muhammad's death, but somehow they've got a copy of the Quran with them, which makes no sense to me at all. Okay. So Amir bin Shah said, I was with the Negus when his son recited a verse of the gospel, so I laughed. Thereupon he said, do you laugh at the word of Allah, the Exalted? That's in Sunan Abi Dawud. Oh, wow. Well, there you go. So when the king heard it, he wept and exclaimed, truly this and what Jesus brought, the gospel, has come from the same source of light, the Mishkat. Jafar, he replied that they held Jesus to be God's servant, his prophet, his spirit, his word, which he cast upon the Virgin Mary. His spirit and his word. Hold on. His prophet, his spirit, and his word. That's three separate things, I'm pretty sure. Muslim accounts state that upon hearing these words, the Negus declared that Jesus was indeed no more than what he said. Interesting. They're rewriting the history right there. Go on, JC.
Yeah, when it says the prophet, that's actually from the Quran. It doesn't say prophet, it says messenger, it says he's the messenger of God, the word and the spirit. So they use the words prophet and messenger like they are exactly the same thing. But Usama, of course, has a lot to say about that. But yeah, it would be for them the same messenger or prophet.
Yeah. So some Islamic links to Ethiopia. Let's have a look at how Ethiopia figures into Islam. The Christian community in South Arabia at Najran, which was perhaps the oldest Christian community in Arabia. Their persecution by the Jewish king Du Nawas is mentioned in the Quran, and they appear to have been a mixed community. Many of them were Nestorians. Others were monophysites, more or less related to the monophysite church of Abyssinia. Okay, that's interesting. So that's South Arabia, Najran. So that would be in Arabia Felix, Arabia, the bearer of heresies, right? That's Arabia Heresium Ferax. And of course, when the heretics were kicked out and all the Gnostics and the heretics were kicked out of Rome, many of them ended up in Najran. Okay. In international trade, Abyssinia was the destination of one of Qusay's 4 sons, who, according to Ibn Abib, in al-Muhabbar, page 163, was Abd Shams. Trade relations between Makkah and Ethiopia went back to late 4th, 5th, or early 6th century. So the Arabians were trading with Mecca and Ethiopia, between Mecca and Ethiopia, between the 5th and 6th centuries already. Okay, that's interesting. So that goes way, way back. Okay, this is before the birth of Muhammad. It's interesting, Catherine says, yeah, that Muslims admitting that Jesus is the word of Allah is bizarre. Yeah, it is bizarre. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, there is something as well kind of connected to this. As we are still all trying to decide what the Quran really was, if it was Arian, Nestorian, Gnostic, it does seem to take from all sorts of heresies all combined into one. But with the Nestorian influence, there are the accounts of Nestorius who teaches Muhammad about the religion. But there is also another account where Muslims, some of the first Muslims during this period of time, they went to China and they created one mosque. But there is another independent account saying that the people that went to China and created a place of worship were actually Nestorians. So there is this weird connection where it seems like maybe these original guys may have been Nestorians, and then of course that gets rebranded to they are Muslims. It's possible.
Right. So we know there's connections, right? Let's continue. So the Arabic word Injil resembles the Ethiopian word Wanjil. So the word had already been introduced into Arabia by Abyssinian Christians at the beginning of the 6th century. The generally accepted origin is Greek, right? Evangelion or Evangelion, right? The good news. And it entered the Arabic via the Ethiopic Wanjil, right? We know that the Ethiopians were probably the first Christian empire in history. They were trading constantly with South Arabia, right? And they eventually controlled all the way into Arabia. They invaded and they controlled Arabia. According to Arthur Jeffrey, the long vowel ending in Wanjil, like the second syllable of Injil, is a close resemblance, right? He wrote the book about the foreign loanwords in the Quran, right? And it's closer than the Syriac, right? The pronunciation in the Ethiopic is closer than the Aramaic Syriac. Abyssinian, philologically, Ethiopic, the ancient language of Abyssinia, is the most closely related to Arabic of all of the Semitic tongues. Ethiopic and Arabic with the languages of the South Arabian and so on, but we'll cut that off there. But we're looking at the Ethiopian language is the closest in terms of pronunciation to Arabic. And then they speak of from the ancient Ge'ez, but it was presumably this ancient language with which the Arabs were in contact in pre-Islamic days and during Muhammad's lifetime. Remember, Muhammad is said to have spoken 2 languages, Arabic and Ethiopian, right? These contacts, as a matter of fact, were fairly close. Previous to the birth of Muhammad, the southern portion of Arabia had been under Abyssinian rule. Tradition relates that Muhammad was born in the year of the elephant, when Mecca was saved from the Abyssinian army, which marched up under Abraha to destroy the city. It is practically certain that there were trade relations between Abyssinia and Arabia at a much earlier period than the Aksumite occupation of Yemen. So this goes back hundreds of years before Muhammad. And friend relations continued in spite of the year of the elephant. Muhammad is said to have sent his persecuted followers to seek refuge in Abyssinia. So despite the year of the elephant issue, they still went to Ethiopia. Meccan merchants employed a body of mercenary Abyssinian troops, and these troops are said to have traveled with their priests and their Bibles. Any comments, JC?
Right, that's actually very interesting. I mean, we know that they took a lot from what Judeo-Christian traditions. It would make more sense what you are saying, that they actually took it from the south as opposed to taking that from the north, from Syria and that region. So if Christianity was going to reach those lands, not that Mecca actually existed, it would make sense words like Injil, that they would take it from Ethiopia, because that's how Christianity would have entered that particular community. And when you said about the elephant, the story about the elephant, yes, I always like to say the name of the elephant is Mahmoud. So there you go.
Yeah, how did he get that name? And it's a female. But yeah. So that Muhammad himself had personal contact with the people who spoke whatever, seems to be indicated from the fact that tradition tells us that his first nurse, and this is the Ethiopic, right? Muhammad's first nurse was an Abyssinian woman, Ayman, and she was with him until his death, apparently, his whole life. That the man he chose as the first muezzin in Islam was Bilal al-Habashi. Habashi, Habesha, Ethiopic, okay? This means the people of the Habesha, the Habesha, the Ethiopians, right? So his first muezzin was Bilal al-Habashi. And the tradition already noted that the Prophet was particularly skilled in the Ethiopian language. So there are numerous records in the Islamic hadiths, in the Sirah, and so on, that he was very highly connected to Ethiopia. Okay, we'll leave that there for now. We'll come back to that. Okay, so let me see. So let's go on to Islamic symbolism and the pagan crescent moon. So let's have a look at the little moon symbol on top of the mosques. Okay, we'll come back to the other portion again in the near future. This is called the hilal. This symbol, this crescent, is called the hilal. Hilal also happens to be the name of a pagan moon god, just so you know, the Arabian moon god, the hilal, the crescent moon god. And he has 12 phases, right? This is the hilal, this is the crescent, this is Islam's symbol. You see here, the crescent and the star. What we have here is the flags of the Arab League. Have a look. You've got the Arab League, it's a crescent moon. Algeria, crescent and star, right? Djibouti has got the star. Comoros Islands has the crescent and 4 stars, right? Jordan has the star, right? Lebanon has the cypress tree, I believe it is. Then Libya, crescent and star. Mauritania, crescent and star. Somalia, the star. Saudi Arabia, the sword, of course, right? Morocco has, an interesting symbol right there. We know this as the satanic pentagram, but fine. Syria has 2 stars. Tunisia, crescent and star. So we see lots of crescents and stars. Now the pentagram is Babylonian. This symbol actually goes back to Babylon. It is the pagan symbol of the gods Ishtar and Marduk, for instance. Now the red is from the imams of Yemen. The red within the flag here of Morocco is taken from the imams of Yemen. And we'll see later that the Muslims claim that the religion is from Yemen. Their religion came from Yemen. And the pentagram is the seal of Solomon. Interesting. So you're going to find all sorts of interesting symbolism here. Here we go. We also know that is the symbol of witchcraft. Any comments before I go on, JC?
Yes, if we think about Jewish symbols, we will probably think about the menorah and the Star of David. Things to do with their history and their tradition. We go to Christianity and it is the cross because of history and tradition. We get to Islam and it's the crescent moon. Oh boy.
Yep. Andrew Martin says, so you can see that Mo was at an intersection of various pagan cultures, and thus unification of Tawhid would seem logical to join together multiple religions to make one. Now tell me, if Islam is Christian light, okay, if it's kind of Christian influenced or whatever, wouldn't we expect to see maybe a cross or something? Why would they go to a pagan symbol? Are you there, JC?
Yeah.
Why are they using such an oddball symbol? Why not something like a fish, like Christians would use, or why not something more specific to Judaism, maybe, something that's more in line with biblical rather than just this oddball set of symbols?
Or they claim that they're bringing back the religion of Abraham, who actually, was a pagan. So it would have to be something to do with Abraham, even if it's just
Right.
an image of him. But that symbol happens to have a lot of other connotations, and it was used by the Persians, and it was used by pagans. So it is very bizarre. It does look like it was a popular symbol, and they have said, okay, we are going to use that one for reasons.
Right. So let's look at the hilal, the crescent. This is Islam's symbol. Now, the cross, and we will discuss this again, but just I thought it might be interesting to mention it here. The cross is clearly historically and symbolically, religiously associated with Christianity. It's important, right? It's an important event. It symbolizes something historical and it symbolizes something of great significance to Christians. That's the cross, right? Any symbol of any religion is obviously important to it. For Islam, it's the crescent and the star, which means that that symbol is important to it. But the crescent and the star is not important to Christians. Isn't that an odd thought there? I mean, would that be correct, JC?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually thinking I've never actually researched the how Islam explains those symbols coming from, because we know that it cannot be, for example, the moon split. That would have made sense, the great symbol of Muhammad, but it's not discussed outside of the narrative until hundreds of years later. So that's certainly not it. It comes from a place, but how do you attach that to the Judeo-Christian tradition and this final prophet? It's rather bizarre, and particularly because it's not a new symbol for Mohammed. You are showing that that symbol was actually in use by other people. It's like they copied instead of creating something new.
Yep. So now the Egyptian hieroglyph for month, right, features a crescent above a star. It is a remnant of a lunar calendar, just like the Muslims have a lunar calendar. And you've got the crescent moon above the star. And we remember we spoke earlier of these columns, the pillars, and that comes from Egypt. There's an Egyptian influence that influenced the following religion, which then influenced Islam as well. The symbol has a spiritual significance in ancient Mesopotamia. The Babylonian cuneiform word "shiptu" or incantation originally took a very similar form to the modern star and crescent and was used to ward off evil, an incantation to ward off evil. This is the earliest hieroglyph that we have from Babylon. Here's the Egyptian symbol. This is the Babylonian hieroglyph, the crescent and the star. In 4500 BC, it was a little easier to draw. There's two lines here, crescent and star. Then in 2800 BC, they had the crescent and star. In 600 BC, you have this crescent and star symbol here. Then you can go here, this boundary stone from King Nebuchadnezzar, who's mentioned in the Bible. You can see here the crescent and the star right on top there, crescent and star, right? This is from Babylon from 1125 to 1104 BC. It contains a star within a crescent, right? And then, of course, the symbols were associated with the deities Shin, the moon, and Ishtar, Venus. Any thoughts?
Interesting. It looks like Muhammad was bringing back not the religion of Abraham, but the religion of the Nebuchadnezzar.
That is fascinating, right? That's a little odd. I mean, what do you think as an audience? I mean, so far of the evidence, I mean, we're going to have to do several episodes to finish this. I mean, obviously I'm describing it a little bit better because I know the topic better now over more time, but hopefully we'll find new research and, shed more light on this. Okay, the lal, the crescent. So the symbol is found in the Parthian Empire. That is Iran, right? The Parthian Empire, Iran. Iran's going to be important for us as well, right? It's on the coins of Phraates the fifth, 2 BC to 4 AD. The star represented either a Zoroastrian divinity, Mithra, or the divinity Tishtria, right? You can see the flame here. You can see the star symbol, the crescent symbol here. You'll see the crescent and star, crescent and star, crescent and star. Here, crescent and star. Here you see the crescent and the star. Here you see the crescent, right? And a disc, crescent and star very clearly here. So you can see 4 of these on the perimeter here, right? So the star and crescent became an emblem of the Iranian, the Parthian kings, and was adopted by the rulers of the Sasanian Empire. The Arabs fought them and eventually defeated them, but they had invaded at one point southern Arabia, and eventually the Muslims invaded them. In the Sasanian period, the star and the crescent is shown with Zoroastrian elements. Coins have a portrait of the king surrounded by the symbol. On the reverse, there's a depiction of a fire altar with attendants. When Muslim Arabs conquered Persia in the 7th century, Sasanian coin designs were preserved. Caliph Abd al-Malik, the reformist from 685 to 705, replaced the fire altar scene with Arabic text, but he kept the stars and crescents. The symbol later then appeared in Muslim art. Why would they keep a pre-Islamic symbol? Isn't that weird? They kept a pre-Islamic pagan symbol, in this case related to the fire god. Isn't that odd?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about because I suppose that most people watching, just like me, we would think, okay, the crescent moon is a symbol of Islam, and that's that. We don't think about, but symbols actually are there for a reason. They come from a specific place. They have a purpose. And Muslims will say, oh no, well, this symbol is, well, because of Muhammad. The problem is that you go back just a few years before the time of Muhammad, and the symbol is in use. So it's like, don't you think it's a little bit of a coincidence that Islam actually took a symbol from a civilization that was there before and it meant something else? Why would they do that? Did they just not have any good, artists, and they just copied that? But why did they not change it later? Why did it continue? So, yeah, this is actually delving deep into the symbolism that was there from day one, and they kept it. So, very interesting stuff.
It's really easy. You know what? It's actually really easy to explain because this is easier than being original. I think it's really simple. It's a lot easier to copy than to be original. So, I mean, would you agree that Islam is clearly taking things from the surrounding region and adapting it? So instead of creating something new, it's taking a mishmash of stuff it already knows and it's trying to repurpose them for its own use rather than being original. So it's taking over things and readapting them.
Yeah.
JC? Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, it certainly looks like that's what they are doing, copy paste.
Yeah, Scrunchy says explore the Nebuchadnezzar link a bit more. I mean, someone can do some research, drop it in the comments later. I mean, we can always look into the Nebuchadnezzar link. But yeah, there's something very interesting there that they're taking from pagans. And so these symbols were all part of the pagan religions at the time, right? This is not Christian or biblical in the sense that it's from God. These are from the enemies of God. So the crescent, now, is it Ottoman or is it pagan, right? Because yeah, the Ottomans love their pagan symbolism too, their crescent and moon. So let's have a look at these coins: crescent and star, crescent and star, crescent and star, crescent and star. Where is this all from? Haran in Turkey, just over the border in Turkey. Haran. Why is Haran important? Well, that's where Abraham is from, right? Haran in Turkey. Haran will come up a lot. That's very important for our discussion. Now let's have a look at the symbol again. Now I have the disc here with the crescent, right? So you have in this case, this disc may be the sun, right? But you have the crescent again. And here you got a pagan Byzantine coin, right? You can see Byzantium. And then you have a Hittite crescent moon. You have a crescent moon and have another symbol inside it there. Right, so this is a very common pagan symbol. Why would Islam associate with a pagan symbol? Let's continue. Of course, Christians, we claim the cross, which is a very different set of pagan than the pagan symbol. So Muslims claim that it is the symbol of the Ottoman Islamic Empire. Lots of Muslims say, the crescent and star was started by the Ottomans. It seems not. It seems to have been around long, thousands of years before the Ottomans even existed. Others say it is a pre-Islamic moon deity. Religious symbols are historically and theologically linked to their culture, right? They are significant. And the cross is linked to the crucifixion of Christ. So it is logical that the crescent moon is historic and theological in Islam. Why would they pick it if the moon wasn't important to them? Don't you think they'd pick a daisy if they were into flowers? I mean, why would they pick a moon? Because they like the moon, right, JC?
Yeah, but even if they wanted to do something a little bit new, no, I mean, the whole tradition of Islam is they were so pagans, and Muhammad breaks the idols. It's like you should have broken the crescent moon as well. But the fact that they adopt something that it is associated not to Islam but to pagans is really a telling that these people just don't have any tradition, don't have any history. They are making it up as they go along, and they just copy from anything, and then they create their own spin to say, "Oh no, this is us. We are genuine." That's what it looks like, copy paste.
Yeah, Sandro says it's a way to appeal to everyone in order to bring them to Islam. Like, oh, you like Jesus? Yeah, we have Jesus too. Oh, you prefer Venus? Yeah, we got Venus. You like the moon? Oh, we got that. It's like, yeah, pretty much. So Islam claims to be the original, true, monotheistic religion of Abraham. Now, Hanif, Arabic and Hebrew, right? The Arabic masculine name meaning righteous person or true believer. It is generally agreed that Hanif is derived from the Syriac word hanpe, meaning heathen or pagan. Very interesting. This is also going to be relevant, the word Hanif, because Muslims are Hanifan. Interesting. Even Allah is Hanifan. They say upright, like a pillar. Upright, like a pillar. But we know that the word Hanif comes from the Syriac word Hanpe, meaning a heathen, a pagan. So that's, in other words, not following God, right? Muslims claim that Muhammad's religion goes back before Judaism and Christianity, before we supposedly went astray. So, and biblically, of course, this is before the law of Moses, right? You had the 7 laws of Noah. A couple of things to keep in mind, right? So before the laws of Moses, we had the 7 laws of Noah, because Moses brought the law, the 10 commandments. Prior to that, they had the 7 laws of Noah, which is basically your basic moral law prior to that. How long are we going to go, Jesse? Because Usama hasn't joined us, and maybe we should just go a couple of pages more. Or maybe we should end here and then, pick this up again later. And what do you think?
We can end whatever you think is a nice break, and then we can continue without having to recap too much.
Yeah, because I think maybe we should end here. And I think because now I'm going to go to the next section, which is the going around the word Hanif, Hanifan, Hanpe. No, that goes into the etymology. So maybe we should stop here on something concrete on the coins. I think we've laid a good foundation, and we can pick this up again. But clearly, we've got symbolism. Would you agree? There's symbolism that attaches to Islam that is all pagan. None of it is biblical in the sense of being from God, from the Jews or from Christians.
Yes, absolutely. And I will need to see what are the excuses in Islam for these symbols, but really they weren't new. It's like with the cross, we know actually, like you said, we know exactly where it comes from and the reason behind it. But when it comes to Islam, it is a very, very pagan symbol. They would have something completely different if it was an Abrahamic religion. And the whole thing that I know you will discuss next time with Hanifa, the Quran doesn't really say about the religion of Abraham much. That is about traditions. The Quran just says Abraham was a nice guy and a good example. And then it says again that Muhammad is a good example, but it's actually talking about Jesus instead. So the whole thing about we are bringing back the religion of Abraham, it was not codified in the Quran. That is appears in the traditions. Basically, once they start creating the religion. So it's just one of those things that are in the narrative, but not really in the Quran.
Yeah, I just want to check something. Just give me 1 second. The covenant of Noah. I just want to go through this for a second. It's going to take me a moment to find this. Catherine, you says Noahide laws waiting in the wings today. It combines Islam with Judaism. That is false. That is wrong. Not at all. Because Noah, let me just show this. I don't have the notes ready here, but Noah is recognized by Christians and Jews as a great man of God, a righteous man. He remained faithful to his calling. He avoided lawlessness and corruption. And he did so by following a God-given set of rules. Right? He was righteous because he followed the laws of God. He was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. He walked with God. Right? So the earth is filled with lawlessness according to God, and Noah walked with the law. He walked in righteousness. So the laws that he followed are laws for the children of Noah, which is refers to all of humanity given to Noah after the flood. Right? These are the laws prior to the laws of Moses, the 10 commandments. So what you've got is he became an heir of righteousness. Okay, others were disobedient, right? But the question is disobedient according to what laws or what standard that God held the world to that caused him to bring the flood, right? So let me go through here. Now, within the Bible, within the Old Testament, you have certain covenants, right? Like circumcision. But now I want to find this whole thing about the laws of Noah. So in Leviticus, he says, "Do my judgments and keep mine ordinances to walk therein." Right? If you keep my statutes and my judgment, which if a man do, he shall live. So Noah was considered righteous according to what laws? What laws were the unrighteous breaking? Right? Because the Ten Commandments were not written, the Ten Commandments were not given, Moses was not alive yet. So, what was the law before Moses? So, let me have a look through this. So, natural law is implied even in the Psalms, okay? And of course, we must keep statutes. Now, if you go into the Bible, when you look at the laws of Noah, right? This is a basic overview of the 7 laws of Noah. So the 7 laws of Noah are biblical prohibitions from God against denying or cursing God, right? It's a prohibition against worshiping idols, a prohibition against murder. Now, if these rules, as many people will tell you, the laws of Noah are satanic, they're evil, they're witchcraft, they're murder, they're disgusting. I don't know, denying or cursing the name of God. Maybe it is. Maybe it is evil and we should be cursing God. Maybe those people are right. Worshipping idols. Yeah, maybe we should be doing that. Maybe those people are right. That the Jews are wrong. We right? Against murder. Yeah, murder's probably right. I would have to agree with these people then. Yeah, Noah was wrong and we should be doing that instead because these laws are satanic. They prevent murder. Adultery and sexual immorality, theft, they prohibit drinking blood and eating flesh torn from a living animal. Don't torture animals and don't drink their blood. And obligations to establish courts of justice. So it should be noted that 6 of these laws of Noah are derived from Genesis, right? The 7th is the establishment of courts of justice. You can read Romans to see about the law and justice. 5 of these laws are repeated in the 10 Commandments. So if these laws are Islamic or satanic, then half of the 10 Commandments must immediately be thrown out because 5 of the 10 Commandments are evil and satanic and Islamic. That would be stupid. I think at a minimum, we can call that incredibly stupid. 9 of the 10 Commandments are repeated and renewed in the New Testament. The New Testament also quotes the Old Testament directly about 855 times, and we can extend that to about 1,300 times with indirect references. So the covenant of Noah from Genesis 9, 8 to 17 applies to all of humanity and all living creatures. In this covenant, God promises never again to destroy all life on earth by flood. He creates the rainbow, and this is a sign of the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature that is on earth. So you've got these moral rules that are, half of them are literally in the 10 Commandments. And apparently this combines Islam with Judaism. In other words, it's semi-Islamic evil, retardation, satanic. I'm sorry, but look, I've spoken about this on the channel before. Okay, so 5 are in the 10 Commandments. Okay, so the 10 Commandments are built on the foundation of the 7 laws of Noah with additional commandments added. So I don't know where people are getting that the laws of Noah are somehow evil because someone's lying to someone. Someone hates Jews and is teaching other people to hate Jews and to despise the Bible as well. And they're doing a very good job as far as I can tell. They're very successful at it. So I am going to leave this here. But if you'd like to say that half of the 10 Commandments is evil, maybe you got to post your Christian card back to your church and say, I give up on Christianity because I can't do 50% evil, satanic 10 Commandments. You know, tell me which 5 are evil. Tell me why murder is something that we should be doing and not something we should avoid. Why sexual immorality is definitely what we should be doing, Muhammad style. Why we should curse God, why we should worship idols, why we should do murder, why we should steal, why we should eat flesh torn from living animals and drink blood, and why we should not have justice. There should be no courts. We must have no police, no government, because that would be fucking stupid. I'll leave it at that. Any thoughts from you, JC, before I go on?
Well, the whole thing about not drinking blood. So, okay, no more Bloody Marys for me, I suppose. The
Philip,
I
sorry,
find it
Philip,
interesting that
you're wrong too. Philip, you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Dead wrong. 100%. Completely and utterly wrong. This is completely wrong. You don't understand the Noahide laws, and people have been listening to anti-Semites and Jew haters. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. They're spewing the Kool-Aid. I'm sorry, but on this particular point, this is false. If you want to claim that Noah was evil and not righteous, go ahead. Then we can argue about whether Noah was evil. Fine, you can take that position, and I'm sure the church is going to say, sorry, Philip, you're wrong too. And then you can say the church is wrong because 5 of the 10 commandments are evil and satanic because they come from dangerous Jews or something. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy that. And if you want to talk about Christians are idolaters and should be gone, I think you're also imbibing Kool-Aid. You're also distorting that message. I've gone through this at length on my channel to discuss these particular arguments, and I'm not going to buy them at all. Sorry, go on, please. JC, sorry.
Yeah, that out of those, the first 5, with all of the work that you have done on Sharia, I think probably you would say that Sharia is not really compliant with the first 5. It will say things like, do not kill, but then is all of the different the qualifications for that. And the first 5 are basically not observed because things like theft, like property only belongs to Allah. So you are allowed to actually take things from non-Muslims because they are not entitled to anything. So the first 5, they are certainly not being followed by Muslims, by Sharia.
Yeah. Actually, let me. I want to bring up something quickly. Actually, I need to find something. Since you just mentioned something to me, bugger. Darn, I lost it. Let me just get back to my reference. Let me bring up this for a second because I want to talk about that. There's something relevant you mentioned there. I'm just going to wait for this to load. Okay, so I want to mention something. This is from the Talmud, all right? There's something that people talk about regularly. So now let me go to the first reference I find here. Okay, so for instance, there's a claim. I'll mention this as a general example. There is a claim by many people who say that the Jews are saying that you must kill Gentiles like you and me who read the Torah, right? Because they see it's called lying about the Talmud. These people are what you call liars, right? Unless the 10 Commandments is wrong and we should lie, then of course that's, then we should do that. So Rabbi Yohanan says a Gentile who engages in Torah study is liable to receive the death penalty. As it is stated, Moses commanded us a law, the Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. That's in Deuteronomy. It's an inheritance for us and not for them. Few people realize the Talmud is a debate. It's an engagement. It's a way of posing a problem and having people debate and discuss. It is often not definitive. But the Gemara challenges, and it says, a Gentile who studies the Torah robs the Jewish people of it, right? And the punishment of a Gentile who studies Torah is like that of one who engages in intercourse with a betrothed young woman, which is execution by stoning, and everyone loses their tiny little minds. But then, of course, the Gemara raises an objection to Rabbi Yohanan's statement, and it says, a Gentile who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest. And it says here, the Torah says, you shall keep my statutes and my ordinances, which if a man does, he shall live by them. Leviticus 18:5. So the phrase, which if priests, Levites, and Israelites do, they shall live by them, is not stated, but rather a man, that is, all men, which indicates mankind in general. And so what we see in the Talmud says, you have therefore learned that even a Gentile who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest. So those people going around saying the Jews are going to chop off your head for reading the Bible are liars. The people who repeat those are liars themselves. And to believe that without having actually read the Talmud, spending months reading it, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to also just do me a favor, just hand in your Christian card, go join Islam, become a Buddhist, become an atheist. But seriously, you're just lazy, you're ignorant, and you hate Jews. Let's just be honest. You despise Jews. Let's be clear about that. This is where this goes. That's what's at the end of the road. When you take the mask off, that's what it is. Right? Let's have a look. There's another one. There's something on theft. I don't have it here right now. But here's something. Okay, so on theft, okay, this all comes from misrepresentations of the Talmud. If a Jew finds an object lost by a goy, it does not have to be returned. Baba Mezia 24a. Now there are lots of fake claims in the Talmud, but it says here, right? If you find a lost item in a place where multitudes are found, like a huge, busy thoroughfare, busy city, the item belongs to him who found it, right? Okay, but did he refer only to a place where there's a majority of Gentiles? But in a place where there's a majority of Jews, even in a place where there is a majority of Jews, he also says that the item belongs to the one who found it. If you read further through this, it tells you when there is no hope, no possibility of finding the owner, then just keep the damn thing, right? There's no hope. And they will talk about, right? In any place where the multitudes are found, these coins belong to him due to the fact that the owner despairs of their recovery. He will never find it. They will tell you about that the Torah says the Talmud says you can lie and all sorts of things. All of these are here. I'll give you this. This is, if you think that they have to tell the truth, you have to understand that in the Talmud, they say, let me quote it, Jews may use lies to circumvent a Gentile. That's in Baba Kama 113a. Owen Benjamin was famous for having this talk here. You can see he discusses it here in this video, right? That's on YouTube. There's a link here. You can see this. And it says here, right, the entire discussion, he says, the Mishnah is discussing a customs collector, a tax collector who does not have a limit, right, placed by the governor on the amount he collects. And he collects as he pleases. In other words, he's stealing money from people, right? They said we are discussing a customs collector who stands on his own, a guy who just says, hey, I'm a tax collector, give me money, right? He forces people to give him money. And then it goes on, I'll just skip over all of this. And it says here, this is a ruling with regard to a Gentile customs collector whom one may deceive as it is taught. In the case of a Jew and a Gentile who approach the court for judgment in a legal dispute, if you can vindicate the Jew under Jewish law, vindicate him and say to the Gentile, but this is our law. If he can be vindicated under Gentile law, vindicate him and say to the Gentile, this is your law. If it is not possible to vindicate him under either system, you approach the case in a roundabout manner, circuitously, and you seek a justification to vindicate the Jew. This is the statement of Rabbi Ishmael. But Rabbi Akiva, he's the big guy. He comes along and he says, no, he disagrees. And he says, one does not approach the case circuitously in order to vindicate the Jew due to the sanctification of God's name. God's name will be desecrated if the Jewish judge employs dishonest means. He goes back to thou shalt not lie. But you know what? Christians in name only will lie about this and say, but the Talmud says, well, those people are liars. They're wrong. And the people who believe them, unfortunately, are fooled. They've drunk the Kool-Aid and they need to get their heads out of their asses. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Anything, your comments on what you've seen here so far, JC?
Yes, or rather a different example that I think most people are familiar with. Everyone watching would have heard a number of times, even politicians, saying, well, the Quran says, which is in Surah 5, verse 32, that he who kills a soul is like he has killed all humankind, and he who saves a soul is like he has saved all humankind. And they stop there. And it's like, and they would say that to say, you see, the Islam is the religion of peace. But if you just look at that verse, it begins with, it was decreed upon the children of Israel that he who kills a soul, blah, blah, blah. And then in the very next verse, verse 33, is when it says, those who wage war against the lands, his messenger will expel them from the lands and crucify them and so on.
Yeah.
And it's like, but what have you heard in the news when they told you one section of one verse, you don't know what came before and what came after. And then you went, okay, yeah, you see, religion of peace, because George Bush said it. And it's like, no, we have to get smarter about these things. When somebody just tells you something that is one line only, that makes particular group look bad, go and research it. And if it is bad, condemn it. But don't just take the word, there are too many liars out there.
Yeah. Yeah, someone made a point here about the U.S. government and the whole idea of the laws of Noah being signed into law. Whatever. There was nothing was signed into law. I've covered that as well. Done extensive work on the channel. I'm not going to do it now because I'd have to look it up and find the references. That said, it is simply an acceptance that these biblical moral laws, effectively natural law, right? It's accepting don't murder, don't rape little girls like Muhammad did, don't steal things, okay? It's simply saying that we acknowledge that these laws have been effective in creating a just society. Western society is built on those laws. And no, the Jews are not going to chop off your head, because I can guarantee you, some Twitter's going to say, yeah, but the Jews are going to chop off your head if you don't. The word for that is bullshit. Okay? The word is bullshit. Do you know who tells these stories? Well, they're the Russians who hated the Jews and wanted to murder them, right? There's also the Muslims who hate the Jews and want to murder them. They tell those stories. Once you go through the actual documentation, you find a different story. So, yeah, there's lots of people that are going to give you a lot of false stories because they haven't actually read the Talmud. I spent months reading the Talmud, months. Okay, I have hundreds of pages of notes on the Talmud. I've done several series with a friend years ago on the Talmud. I did hours, about 14 or 16 hours, just discussing the Talmud. And all of these stories that people tell about the Talmud, 99% of them are completely false. So I'm going to leave it at that. Where is Usama? Did he drop into the chat? So anyway, but yeah.
Well, I didn't see him. Just, I will add to that. A good rule of thumb is if the stuff that you hear, like those sort of things, are they sort of talking points that you would expect from, say, the Muslim Brotherhood, is probably
Yep.
false. Normally, you can
Yep.
see who are the bad guys, and if you find yourself using the same talking points as the bad guys, they are probably not giving you the full picture, and you have just been deceived. So, don't do that.
Yeah. So RVM Tube says, you said the word south in Maltese is Il Qibla. Is this true? We need to look into that in the comment here.
Yeah, yes, actually, I recorded a show with Noel from Malta, and it is going to be the next one that I upload with him, and that's the central topic of that next conversation. So stay tuned. It's actually that the cardinal points in Maltese, they are all pretty much the same, but when it comes to south, in Maltese is Qibla, but in Arabic it changed to something else. So it's very, very interesting, and maybe that is a clue as to what was going on. So make sure that you catch that show.
Okay, yeah. I'll end with one more, just out of interest, because this I've also heard a lot. A Gentile protects and thereby spares his own animal so that it will not become barren. Since an act of bestiality may cause an animal to become barren, there is no concern that the Gentile engaged in immoral behavior with it. You see, so people are going to make all sorts of claims about what the Jews are saying. Now, sure, you can go to that Jewish rabbi said. Yeah, then the guy's an asshole. Okay. We can also go to the what's that crazy Baptist church that people used to freak out about? We can go to plenty of priests that say the dumbest of things, that say the most wrong of things. That doesn't mean they speak for all Christians or all Jews. It just means that person's a complete asshole. I think it's that simple. But when you look at what the Jews believe and what the Talmud teaches, those are very different things. Yeah.
Yeah, if someone that claims to be a scholar or a priest or whatever it is, a person like that, providing that you don't worship them because you think that they brought a revelation from the heavens or something of the sort, if you don't worship them, then you are okay. They are people, they have their opinions, and they are fallible. But if you think that one of those guys is infallible, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's the Westboro Baptist Church. Yeah, those guys. So, guys, we'll call it a day here. Hopefully, this has been enlightening, educational, because there's a lot of bad information about Judaism, about the Talmud, and also about Islam, as we know that. And I think there's enough evidence to show that there's something connected to Islam that is clearly pagan, clearly goes back 3, 4, 5,000 years that they've adapted and adopted into Islam. So yeah, final word from you, JC. What made you want to talk about this topic? And yeah, what do you think we'll find, and what's the significance of this?
I think it's very well fascinating and something that really has to be done. I do have the feeling still that the Quran comes from pretty much just a Judeo-Christian tradition, that it told a very different story than we read now. But Islam appears much later, and I think all of the things that we've seen with Kalam, with Odon, and here this series is about how did Islam begin? Where did they copy things from? Because it's certainly not copy paste from Judaism or Christianity. That is the Quran. But their traditions, they seem to be taken from those places. And before you were talking about the Sabians, and I remember seeing from the Christian Prince one video where he showed how they do the voodoo, and it's exactly the
Mhm.
same as Islam. So he said, look, they copied this from those guys. So I think in order to understand the bigger picture of how Islam appeared, what they copied from different places, we need to put all of the cards on the table. And certainly your research is really great. So I think this is going to get us closer to the answers that we really seek.
Yeah, no, that's true. RVM2 says the word for south in Maltese is Nofsinhar. The Qibla is older than our current cardinal point, but that's interesting news though. It's actually very, very interesting. Yeah, Islam is desperately seeking global recognition as the better way, equal to Judaism and better than Christianity. I mean, look, seriously, you know what? People are just trying to say things like, oh, just say, look, Muhammad was a slave. Just compare Muhammad and Jesus. Say, how many slaves did Muhammad own? How many slaves did Jesus own? Who set the better moral example? Slavery is bad, right? Just say, is slavery bad? Yeah, slavery is terrible. How many slaves did Muhammad own? How about Aisha? How many slaves did she own? How about Muhammad's companions? How many slaves did they own? Okay, now do Jesus and his apostles. How many slaves did they own? Like zero, right? So Muhammad is the perfect man, the perfect example that all Muslims must follow. Owned slaves, had sex slaves. How many sex slaves and 6-year-olds did Jesus bang? Nobody. What about Muhammad? Yeah, we can make a list. Simple as that. They're not, seriously, just say no. Jesus set the superior example. Muhammad set the inferior example. Even in the Quran, Jesus is sinless. Muhammad is not. Jesus and his mother are sinless. Muhammad needs to be forgiven for his sins. So yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, Islam cannot date back to Abraham without being originally pagan. Yeah, that's something. Yeah, so Islam just does pick up things. Yeah, they will turn the pedophile into Jesus. In fact, no, they've already turned the pedophile into Jesus. If you go through the Siddur, already from like the 900s onwards, they were attributing the miracles and events of Jesus to Muhammad. I've gone through this before. They make Muhammad into Jesus. He's there at the beginning when God makes the world, and he is the substance of which God makes the universe and makes the world. And it's all insane. It's all seriously. Just read the Siddur. He's already Jesus. So we'll call it that. So, guys, let's call it a night here. But thank you very much. I'll be back tomorrow with Sama. He didn't join us this evening. That was very sad. But thanks, JC. Hopefully, you enjoyed this, and we'll do this again next week. And we'll see each other
Yeah,
on
look forward
Wednesday
to
as
it.
well for the next episode with Odon. So, guys, thanks all very much. Last word to you.
Yeah, thank you. I will look forward to the next one and to see what else we actually show the audience. So thank you, Lloyd, and thank you for everyone watching. Looking forward to the next one.
Yep. Take care, guys. Everyone. Good night. Goodbye.